The small town of Hilford lay quiet under a thick blanket of snow. Winter had come early that year, and the cold had been stronger than usual. Trees were covered in frost, the river had frozen over, and rooftops held thick layers of snow. The wind blew sharply through the streets, making everyone hurry home and close their doors. At the edge of town, at the end of a narrow lane, stood a small, humble house. Its wooden walls were old but sturdy, and smoke curled from the chimney, filling the air with the warm smell of burning wood. Inside lived Mina, an elderly widow. She had lived alone for many years since her husband had passed away. Mina was a kind woman, always ready to help others, but the people of Hilford often overlooked her because she lived quietly. That evening, Mina sat by her fireplace, knitting a scarf. The flames flickered and danced, casting soft shadows across the room. Outside, the wind howled and shook the windows. Mina's cat, a gray tabby named Momo, curled beside her, purring softly. The house was peaceful, warm, and safe, a small haven against the freezing storm outside. Far from Mina's house, 20 young wrestlers were traveling for a regional tournament. They were strong, fast, and confident, but they were not prepared for the sudden blizzard that had struck Hilford. Their bus had broken down on a narrow, icy road in the hills, and the driver had tried everything to restart it. The engine would not turn, and soon, the wrestlers realized that they were trapped. The temperature was dropping quickly, and the cold began to bite through their thick jackets. The wrestlers tried to call for help, but there was no signal. They looked around the empty snow-covered road and saw only trees, hills, and the swirling white storm. One of them, a tall young man named Arif, suggested they try to find shelter on foot. They wrapped themselves in jackets, scarves, and gloves, and slowly started walking, hoping to find a house or farm nearby. After what felt like an hour, their frozen feet slipping in the snow, they spotted a faint light in the distance. A small window glowed with warmth, and smoke rose gently from a chimney. With renewed hope, they hurried toward it, calling out, but their voices were nearly drowned by the wind. Mina, sitting by her fire, heard a knock on her door. She stood slowly, her bones stiff from age, and went to open it. Outside, the 20 wrestlers were shivering, their faces pale from cold, their teeth chattering. Mina's eyes widened, not in fear, but in concern. "Oh my! You must come in quickly," she said, her voice gentle but firm. She opened the door wide and guided them inside. One by one, they stepped into the warm room, shedding wet jackets and gloves. The heat hit them immediately, and they could feel life returning to their frozen fingers and toes. Mina moved quickly, setting blankets on the chairs and the floor. She lit a second fire in the old stove and began preparing hot water for tea. She could see how exhausted they were, their bodies trembling despite the heavy jackets they wore. She spoke softly to calm them, offering words of comfort while she worked. "Sit here by the fire," she instructed. "I'll make something warm for you to drink. You must be frozen." The wrestlers were amazed. They had never met someone so kind, especially in the middle of a storm where almost no one would dare to help strangers. One of them, Bilal, looked at Mina in surprise. "Are you really letting 20 strangers stay in your house? In this weather?" he asked. Mina smiled. "Everyone deserves warmth and safety in a storm. You would do the same for someone else, I hope." The wrestlers were silent, not sure what to say. They were used to strength in the ring, victories, and challenges, but this was different. This was kindness, something they had rarely experienced. Mina worked quietly but efficiently. She brought out blankets and laid them on the floor, making small beds for the wrestlers. She poured hot soup into bowls and handed them around. The aroma filled the room, and the wrestlers immediately felt the warmth in their bellies. They ate quickly, savoring the food and the care behind it. While they ate, Mina walked around, checking each of them. She noticed a young wrestler, Shabazz, whose lips were blue from the cold. She wrapped a thick blanket around him and gave him extra soup. She reminded them to drink slowly, to warm their bodies gently. Some wrestlers tried to help by moving chairs closer to the fire or stacking blankets, but Mina stopped them gently. "Sit, rest, and recover. You have already walked through the cold for too long." As the evening passed, the wrestlers began to feel comfortable. The warmth of the fire and Mina's care seeped into their tired bodies. Momo, the cat, walked among them, purring and curling around their legs, adding a touch of softness to the room. The storm outside raged on, but inside Mina's little house, there was peace. The wrestlers, who had spent the day competing with each other and striving to win, now found themselves humbled. They realized how small and powerless they were against nature, and how much a simple act of kindness could change a desperate situation. Mina, too, felt something she hadn't felt in years. She had spent many winters alone, often ignored by the town. But tonight, her home was full of life and laughter. She saw in these young men a chance to share warmth, to show that care and generosity could be stronger than fear or pride. As night fell, the wrestlers settled near the fire. Some lay on the floor, wrapped in blankets. Some sat on chairs, leaning back with tired eyes closed. Mina kept moving quietly, making sure the fire burned steadily and that everyone had enough food and warmth. The wind howled, the snow piled higher, but inside, Mina's house was safe and bright. The wrestlers, once cold and desperate, now felt hope and gratitude. They had met someone extraordinary, an elderly widow who opened her home without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. Mina herself sat back by the fire after checking everyone. Her hands were tired, but her heart was full. She had faced many storms in her life, but helping these young men through this one gave her a new sense of purpose. She whispered to herself, "Everyone deserves kindness, no matter how small their house or how old they are." Outside, the storm raged, but inside, warmth, care, and quiet happiness filled the room. Mina had given shelter, food, and hope to 20 freezing wrestlers, and in return, she received something she had been missing for a long time, a sense of connection and meaning. That night, the wrestlers slept peacefully, safe from the cold, surrounded by warmth they had never expected. And Mina, the elderly widow, stayed awake for a little while longer, watching over them, her heart quietly proud of the simple but powerful act she had done. The next morning, Mina woke up early. The sky was pale, and the storm had calmed, leaving the world outside sparkling white under a soft layer of snow. She moved quietly through the house, careful not to wake the wrestlers who were still sleeping on the blankets she had laid out the night before. The smell of fresh bread filled the air as she baked a small loaf, and the fire in the hearth crackled warmly. Slowly, the wrestlers began to wake. Some stretched and yawned, blinking at the bright sunlight coming through the windows. Their first instinct was to check the cold outside, but the warmth in Mina's house made them pause. The night had been long, and they were amazed at how comfortable it felt indoors. Mina called softly, "Good morning, boys. Breakfast will be ready soon. Wash your faces and warm your hands before eating." One by one, the wrestlers washed in the small basin Mina had filled with warm water. Their frozen faces began to color again, and their stiff muscles relaxed. Arif, the tallest of the group, was the first to approach the table, still wrapped in a blanket. He glanced at Mina with admiration. "I've never seen anyone do so much for strangers," he said quietly. Mina smiled gently. "It is important to help when you can. The world can be cold in many ways, not just the snow outside. Everyone deserves a safe place and a warm meal." The wrestlers looked at each other, realizing how simple yet powerful Mina's words were. They had traveled to compete, always thinking about victory and training. But this night had reminded them that life could be more than trophies or medals. It could be about kindness, trust, and care. Breakfast was simple but hearty. Mina served warm bread with honey, bowls of steaming porridge, and mugs of sweet tea. The wrestlers ate slowly, savoring every bite, not just because they were hungry, but because it was made with care. Mina watched them eat, making sure no one felt left out. After breakfast, some wrestlers tried to help clean up. Bilal, who was known for being strong and sometimes impatient, picked up a broom and began sweeping snow off the porch. Mina shook her head with a soft laugh. "There is no need to work yet. Rest and warm up. The snow will not leave in a hurry." But the wrestlers insisted. They wanted to repay her in some way, even if it was small. Soon, they were chopping firewood, stacking blankets neatly, and helping to carry water from the small well outside. Mina watched silently, her heart swelling with happiness. It was the first time in years that she felt truly surrounded by life and energy. While the wrestlers worked, Mina sat at the kitchen table, knitting quietly. She began to tell stories from her past, hoping to entertain and teach the young men about life beyond strength and competition. "My husband and I built this house many years ago," she said. "It was small then, and we had very little. But we always shared what we had with others. One winter, many travelers came to our door, and we had no choice but to share the little food we had. That night, I learned that giving could make you feel richer than money ever could." The wrestlers listened with curiosity. They were fascinated by Mina's stories. They had always admired strength and skill in wrestling, but here was a woman who showed a different kind of strength, the strength to care, to share, and to help without expecting anything in return. "Do you live here alone?" asked Shabazz, a quiet wrestler with thoughtful eyes. "Yes," Mina replied softly. "Since my husband passed, I have been alone. But I have my memories, my garden, my cat Momo, and now, apparently, a house full of guests." She chuckled, and the wrestlers laughed too, feeling at ease. By midday, the storm had completely passed. The wrestlers looked outside at the bright snow, but no one seemed eager to leave. They were grateful for the warmth, the food, and the comfort of Mina's little house. They realized that their journey to the tournament could wait a little while, and for once, they could simply enjoy kindness without rushing. Some wrestlers began to help Mina with small chores. Raza carried firewood inside, while Faison helped wash the breakfast dishes. Mina watched quietly, noticing how polite and careful they were despite their large size and usual roughness. Their manners were different from their usual strong and competitive appearance. While they worked together, Mina asked questions about their lives. She learned how much effort they had put into wrestling, how early they woke, and how hard they trained. She admired their dedication but reminded them gently that physical strength alone did not make a person complete. "You are strong in your bodies," she said, "but you also need to be strong in your hearts. The world is full of people who may be cold or in need. You must learn to help them, not just fight for medals." The wrestlers were quiet for a moment, thinking about her words. They had been taught to fight, to win, to be proud. But Mina's words made them realize there was another kind of courage, one that did not come from the ring. After lunch, Mina took them on a small walk outside. The snow had stopped falling, and the hills around Hilford sparkled in the sunlight. She showed them the little garden she had planted before winter, covered now in white. "This will bloom again in spring," she said. "Life always returns. Even after the hardest winters, warmth and color come back. You must remember this, in wrestling and in life." The wrestlers watched quietly, feeling the peace of the snow-covered world. They began to understand what Mina meant. Strength was not just about muscles or speed. It was also about patience, care, and the ability to help others when they could. That evening, as the sun began to set, Mina prepared another meal. The wrestlers sat around the fire, eating and sharing stories. They laughed at each other's training mistakes, at funny moments from the tournament, and even at Mina's gentle jokes. It was a simple evening, but one of the most memorable they had ever had. Mina noticed that the wrestlers were starting to see each other differently as well. They were no longer just teammates or rivals. They had shared a difficult night, received care, and learned lessons about humility and kindness. They were beginning to understand the power of gratitude and generosity. When the wrestlers finally went to bed that night, Mina stayed awake for a while. She watched the fire burn low and thought about how a single act of opening her door had changed so much. 20 young men, full of energy and pride, had experienced the warmth of a safe home and the care of someone who had nothing to gain. Mina smiled softly, feeling a quiet pride. The wrestlers had learned something important, and so had she. Even though she lived alone and had faced many winters, tonight reminded her that kindness could create bonds that strength alone never could. Outside, the night was calm. Snow glistened under the moonlight, and the world seemed peaceful. Inside Mina's house, warmth, laughter, and quiet happiness filled every corner. The wrestlers slept, tired but grateful, and Mina finally rested, feeling the satisfaction of a day spent in giving and caring. The next morning promised more challenges, but for now, the house was a safe haven. And Mina, the elderly widow, had shown once again that even the smallest home, when filled with kindness, could become the strongest shelter against any storm. The morning sun shone brightly over Hilford, glinting off the snow that covered the hills. Mina woke early, as she always did, and prepared a light breakfast for her unexpected guests. The wrestlers had slept well, wrapped in warm blankets, and now their faces were rosy from rest. After breakfast, Mina suggested a small task to help them stay active indoors. "Since the roads are still icy, it is better to stay here for a while," she said. "Let's help me organize the house a little. It will pass the time, and you can keep warm." The wrestlers agreed happily. They were strong and energetic, but after the long night in the cold, this activity felt calm and pleasant. Mina led them to the attic, a dusty room she rarely visited. The attic had old furniture, boxes, and trunks stacked neatly. The wrestlers were curious, looking around at the unusual items and old photographs. "Be careful," Mina said, guiding them. "Some of these things are very old, and I do not want anything broken." As they explored, one wrestler, Bilal, noticed a small, heavy trunk tucked behind a pile of blankets. It was covered in dust and cobwebs. "What's in here?" he asked, trying to lift the lid. Mina's eyes softened as she walked over. "That trunk belonged to my late husband. It has things from our past, letters, photos, and a few small treasures. I have not looked inside for years." The wrestlers gathered around, curious and respectful. Mina carefully opened the trunk. Inside, she found old letters tied with ribbons, some coins, a few handmade tools, and a small wooden box. She smiled faintly, brushing the dust off. "These letters are from people we helped in the past," she explained. "When we lived here together, my husband and I often welcomed travelers or strangers. They wrote to us, thanking us for our kindness. I kept these letters to remember that even small actions can make a big difference." The wrestlers were silent. They had never thought of strength in this way before. In wrestling, winning and being the best were everything. But here, in this quiet attic, surrounded by memories of generosity, they felt something new. Mina opened the small wooden box carefully. Inside were several folded pieces of paper and a few small bundles of money. She picked up a letter and read it aloud softly. It was from a young boy, thanking her and her husband for giving him food and shelter when he was lost during a snowstorm many years ago. The wrestlers listened closely. They could hear the boy's gratitude, even decades later, and they were moved. They had never experienced anything like this. Their lives had been full of competition and physical training, but they had rarely seen the effect of true kindness. Mina looked at the wrestlers with a soft smile. "I kept these letters to remind myself that helping others is never wasted. Even small acts can change lives. And now, I hope they will remind you of the importance of care, too." One of the wrestlers, Raza, spoke up. "We have never thought about helping people like this. We fight, we train, we win. But this is something different." "Yes," Mina said. "Strength is not only in your body. The strongest people are those who use their hearts to help others. That is the kind of courage that matters most." The wrestlers spent the rest of the morning examining the attic under Mina's guidance. They discovered old tools, books, and even a small wooden chest of games. Mina shared stories about each item, explaining how her husband had taught her to fix things, to read carefully, and to value simple joys. As the hours passed, the wrestlers began to understand the quiet life of Mina. It was not exciting in the way they were used to, but it was full of purpose, care, and wisdom. They realized that a single person, even one living alone in a small house, could make a difference in the lives of many. At one point, Mina pulled out a large, folded blanket from the trunk. "This was my husband's favorite blanket," she said. "It kept him warm through many winters. I want you to use it for now, to feel the warmth and comfort that kindness can give." The wrestlers accepted the blanket with gratitude, wrapping it around themselves. They felt its weight, softness, and warmth. It was not just a blanket, it was a symbol of care, of someone thinking of them when they were cold, hungry, and tired. After exploring the attic, Mina led them back downstairs. She brought out paper, pencils, and small notebooks. "Why don't you write something?" she suggested. "Write a memory, a story, or a thought about today. It helps you remember lessons, and it can be shared with others someday." At first, the wrestlers were hesitant. Writing was not something they did often. But soon, they began to write small notes. Some wrote about the storm, some about Mina's kindness, and some even drew small sketches of the warm room and the fire. By the afternoon, a sense of calm and reflection had settled over the house. The wrestlers were learning that strength was not just about fighting. It was about thinking, caring, and remembering. Mina's quiet words and actions were teaching them more than any coach ever had. As evening approached, Mina decided to prepare another meal. She asked the wrestlers to help set the table and carry water from the well. They worked together efficiently, laughing and talking as they did. It was the first time they had experienced teamwork without competition, without rivalry, and they found it surprisingly enjoyable. While the meal cooked, Mina spoke again about life lessons. "Life will challenge you," she said. "It will be like a winter storm sometimes, cold, hard, and frightening. But you must always offer warmth to others if you can. Your strength is not just your muscles. It is your heart, your patience, and your willingness to help." The wrestlers listened quietly, reflecting on her words. They began to see Mina not just as a kind old woman, but as a teacher, someone showing them a different kind of victory. One that did not require a medal or applause, but one that left a lasting impact on the world. When night fell, Mina lit the fire, and the wrestlers gathered around. They felt a new sense of understanding and respect. They were no longer just visitors, they were students of a simple, extraordinary life. Mina's home, her stories, and her kindness had taught them lessons that strength alone could never teach. Before bed, Mina brought out extra blankets for everyone. "Sleep well," she said gently. "Tomorrow will be another day, and you may return to your tournament. But remember what you learned here. Remember kindness and care, even in the strongest storms." The wrestlers nodded, feeling deeply moved. They had expected to survive a snowstorm. Instead, they had discovered something far more valuable: lessons in life, respect for others, and the quiet power of generosity. As they drifted off to sleep, Mina sat by the fire, knitting quietly. She felt a soft pride and happiness that filled her heart. In one night, her home had become a place of warmth, learning, and understanding. And for the first time in a long while, she realized that the world was not entirely cold. There was still goodness, and it could be shared, one act at a time. Outside, the snow glistened under the moonlight, peaceful and silent. Inside Mina's home, warmth, care, and quiet wisdom filled the room. The wrestlers slept, tired but inspired, and Mina finally rested, knowing that this day had been more than shelter. It had been a beginning of something meaningful in their lives. The morning light spilled into Mina's small house, making the snow outside sparkle like crystals. Inside, the wrestlers were stirring, stretching their stiff muscles after another restful night. The storm had passed completely, leaving the roads icy but passable. The young men knew they should be leaving soon to continue their journey to the tournament, but something in the warmth of Mina's home made them hesitate. Mina moved around quietly, preparing breakfast for her guests. She boiled water for tea, warmed some bread, and laid out bowls of porridge. Her movements were slow, careful, and full of purpose. She had learned to live alone in a way that made every action meaningful. Today, she had a feeling that this day would be special, not just for her, but for the wrestlers as well. After breakfast, Mina suggested a small activity. "Before you leave," she said, "there is one more thing I want to show you. Come with me." She led them into the backyard, where the snow was deep and untouched. The wrestlers followed, curious. In one corner of the yard, partially hidden by a snowdrift, Mina revealed a small wooden door built into the ground. It was almost invisible, and the wrestlers had never noticed it before. Their eyes widened. "What is this?" asked Arif, bending down to inspect it. Mina smiled. This is something my husband and I built many years ago. It is a small underground shelter. We used it to store food, keep warm during the harshest storms, and sometimes to hide in case of danger. No one in the town knows about it." The wrestlers exchanged glances, impressed and surprised. They had never expected such a secret from someone so gentle and quiet. Mina opened the door, revealing a ladder that led down into a cozy underground room. The wrestlers climbed down carefully, one by one. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves holding jars of preserved food, blankets, and supplies. A small stove sat in the corner, surrounded by neatly stacked firewood. The room was simple but perfectly organized, warm, and safe. "This is amazing," said Bilal, running his hands over the shelves. "You built this yourself?" Mina nodded. "Yes. My husband and I wanted to be ready for any winter storm. We never expected 20 young men to need it, but tonight, I think it may be useful." She looked at them seriously. Strength is not only in fighting. It is in preparing, protecting, and helping others when they need it most. The wrestlers were quiet for a moment, taking in the importance of her words. They had never considered that true strength could include foresight, planning, and care for others. Just then, a strong gust of wind rattled the windows above ground. The wrestlers shivered slightly, realizing that winter storms could be dangerous if one was unprepared. Mina, calm and collected, tended to the small stove in the shelter, making sure the fire burned steadily. She handed each wrestler a warm blanket and a mug of tea. "This is why we prepare," she said softly. "When the storm comes, those who are ready will survive comfortably. Those who are not may struggle." Shabazz looked around, studying the shelter. "It's incredible. We've never seen anything like this. This could have saved us last night if we hadn't found your house." Mina smiled quietly. "It is not just about surviving the cold. It is about using what you have to help others. The stronger and smarter you are, the more you can do to make life easier for someone else." The wrestlers felt a mix of admiration and humility. They were strong athletes, but Mina had shown them that intelligence, care, and planning could be just as important as physical strength. They began helping her check the supplies, organizing the shelves, and even lighting the stove properly. Mina guided them patiently, teaching them small lessons about safety, warmth, and the importance of attention to detail. By midday, the wrestlers had learned more than they expected. They realized that strength without wisdom could only take you so far. Mina had created a place that was safe, organized, and comforting, showing that true preparation required patience, thought, and care. Mina then told them a story about the shelter. "One winter, a traveler came to our door, lost and hungry. We guided him to this shelter. He stayed for a few nights until he could continue his journey. Years later, he sent us a letter, saying that our kindness saved his life. That is the most important reward of all." The wrestlers listened intently. Some were silent, reflecting on their own actions and experiences. They began to understand that their victories in wrestling were temporary, but acts of kindness could have a lasting impact on people's lives. As the afternoon passed, Mina suggested they take a small walk outside to see the hills. The snow was soft and sparkling, and the world seemed peaceful and quiet. The wrestlers noticed tracks in the snow, animal tracks, footprints, and signs of nature's presence, and Mina explained how important it was to observe, understand, and respect the world around them. "This," she said, "is another kind of strength. To live in harmony with nature, to watch, to learn, and to protect. It is just as important as any fight in the ring." The wrestlers nodded, impressed by her wisdom. They had spent their lives chasing medals, competitions, and victories, but here, in the presence of a quiet, elderly widow, they were learning lessons far greater than any they could learn on a mat. When they returned inside, Mina prepared another simple meal. As they ate, she asked them what they had learned so far. One by one, the wrestlers shared their thoughts. They spoke about kindness, preparation, patience, and the power of helping others. Mina listened carefully, smiling at each young man. "You are learning quickly," she said softly. "Remember, the world is full of challenges. strength alone cannot carry you through life. You must use your heart and your mind to guide your actions. As night fell, the wrestlers gathered near the fire. They were exhausted but satisfied. They had learned more in one day than in many months of training. Mina sat quietly, watching the flames flicker, feeling proud of the lessons she had shared. Before bed, she reminded them again about the shelter. If a storm returns, remember what you saw here. Plan ahead, help others, and do not be afraid to open your doors to those in need. That is true courage. The wrestlers nodded, feeling a deep respect for Mina and her wisdom. They had never met anyone like her before. Not only had she kept them safe, fed them, and warmed them, but she had also opened their minds to a new understanding of life and strength. As they drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in blankets and surrounded by warmth, the wrestlers felt a sense of peace. Mina, sitting quietly by the fire, knew that her little house had become more than a shelter from the storm. It had become a place where lessons were learned, hearts were touched, and courage was redefined. Outside, the snow glistened under the moonlight, calm and silent. Inside, the house was alive with quiet understanding, warmth, and the beginnings of transformation. The wrestlers would leave Hilford soon, but the lessons they had learned from Mina would stay with them forever. The morning sun rose slowly over Hilford, sparkling off the snow-covered hills. Mina's little house was quiet, except for the soft crackle of the fire in the hearth. Today was the day the wrestlers would leave. The storm had passed, the roads were clear, and the team needed to reach the tournament. Mina moved around the kitchen, preparing breakfast for her guests one last time. She baked a fresh loaf of bread, made hot porridge, and brewed tea that filled the room with a comforting aroma. The wrestlers, now rested and warmed, slowly gathered around the table. They had slept well in the warmth of Mina's home and the underground shelter, and their energy had returned. "This will be our last meal together," Mina said softly, "but I hope it is not the last time you remember what you learned here. Remember, strength is not only in your muscles, but in your heart and mind as well." The wrestlers nodded, looking thoughtful. They had expected to survive a snowstorm, but they had gained so much more. Mina had taught them lessons in kindness, patience, and preparation. Her quiet words and actions had opened their minds to a new understanding of life. After breakfast, Mina went to the attic and brought out the folded blankets she had kept there. Each blanket was carefully stitched and clean, and she handed them to the wrestlers. On each blanket, she had sewn a small note that read, "Kindness is stronger than any fight." The wrestlers were touched. They looked at Mina in admiration and gratitude. "We can never thank you enough," said Arif, his voice full of emotion. "You saved us, fed us, and taught us something far greater than any victory in wrestling." Mina smiled warmly. "You do not need to thank me. Just remember to help others when you can. That is all the thanks I need." The wrestlers spent the morning packing their belongings and preparing to leave. Some carried blankets, others carried small jars of preserves that Mina had insisted they take. These gifts were not expensive or grand, but they were given with care, and the wrestlers understood their value. Before leaving, they all gathered outside for a group photograph. Mina stood in the middle, surrounded by 20 young men who had been strangers a few days ago but were now like family. The snow sparkled around them, and the sunlight reflected in the wrestlers' eyes. They were strong, confident, and now wiser. "Goodbye, Mina," said Shabazz. "We will never forget you or this house. You have changed our lives." Mina waved, her eyes misty. "Goodbye, my boys. Go safely. Use your strength wisely, and never forget the lessons of kindness and care." The wrestlers left, walking carefully down the snow-covered path. They were heading toward the town and eventually to their tournament, but their hearts were different now. They had learned that strength alone could not carry a person through life. True courage came from the ability to help, to care, and to prepare. As the wrestlers disappeared from sight, Mina returned to her house. She felt a quiet peace. Her life had been simple and sometimes lonely, but these young men had reminded her of the importance of giving and the joy that comes from helping others. Mina spent the rest of the day tidying her house, checking the firewood, and feeding Momo, her cat. She looked out the window and thought about the wrestlers, wondering how they would carry the lessons she had shared into the world. She smiled, knowing that even small acts of kindness could have a lasting effect. A few days later, Mina received a letter at her door. It was from the wrestling team. They had returned from the tournament and wanted to share their gratitude once more. The letter read, "Dear Mina, thank you for your warmth, your food, and your guidance. We learned more from you than we could ever learn from a coach or a competition. Your kindness has changed the way we see the world. We promise to carry your lessons with us, to help others, and to always remember that true strength comes from the heart. With respect and gratitude, your friends, the wrestlers of Hilford." Mina read the letter carefully, her eyes filling with tears of happiness. She folded it slowly and placed it in a small box with the other letters from her past. She realized that her life, though quiet, had touched many people and would continue to touch many more. Weeks passed, and the wrestlers kept their promise. They visited Mina whenever they could, bringing small gifts, helping with chores, and sharing their experiences from the tournament. They also started helping people in need around town, inspired by Mina's lessons. Their acts of kindness spread, and soon others in Hilford began to follow their example. Mina watched with quiet pride. She had never expected to change so many lives, but by opening her home and her heart, she had created something far greater than she could imagine. She knew that the lessons of kindness, preparation, and care would continue to ripple through the town, touching lives for years to come. One snowy evening, Mina sat by her fire with Momo on her lap. She looked around her little house, thinking about the wrestlers and the storm that had brought them to her door. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Her home had been a shelter, a teacher, and a place of warmth for those who needed it most. And though Mina was alone again, she was not lonely. She carried in her heart the memories of the wrestlers, their laughter, their respect, and the lessons they had learned together. Her small acts of kindness had created a world that was stronger, warmer, and brighter. Mina whispered softly to herself, "Strength is not just in the body, but in the heart. And the world will always remember those who give without expecting anything in return." Outside, the snow continued to fall gently, covering the hills in a peaceful white blanket. Inside Mina's house, the warmth of the fire and the quiet joy of giving filled every corner. She had shown 20 young men what it truly meant to be strong, and in doing so, she had reminded herself of the power of kindness, courage, and love. And in Hilford, the story of the elderly widow who sheltered 20 freezing wrestlers spread quietly, inspiring others to open their hearts and homes. Mina's simple house, once unnoticed at the edge of town, had become a symbol of hope, warmth, and the true meaning of strength.